And we are live. Let's.
We are live.
We are live. When I say we are live, when I say we are live when we start the broadcast, but it always takes a few
Yes,
seconds
I'm alive. I'm alive.
for it
That's my
to
pulse.
actually show up on start actually streaming to the people on YouTube live. So I'm watching like the counter here, and people are starting to join. We'll give them a few minutes. So we'll get 16 viewers, 17. They're starting to come in. So we'll give a few minutes to let people some time if they are a little bit late, so they can join. Um, Meanwhile, I'm just going to invite everyone who is watching this. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Speaking of wherever you are in the world, it would be nice if you could go into the live chat, and which you can find if you are on my website. You see photos of me under the video. There's a text there that says if you want to join the live chat, click here to access the YouTube live page. It will be streaming the same thing, but there's a live chat on the side where people can ask questions. And I encourage you to tell us where you're from. Just getting to know each other. Mm. Another thing is that if you click on the link, it will open another tab in your browser with the same streaming. So there's a chance that the two streamings are playing at the same time, slightly off, and so you might hear an echo. So it's better if you close the original tab or you mute that, because otherwise, if you're hearing an echo, that's the reason why is that um, you have two streams open at the same time. So I see here Geoff was chatting here. If people are joining, can you please tell us where you're from? And again, if you have any questions, you can type them in the live chat. We'll try to answer as many during this webinar as possible. Okay, that's it for the administrative, the little technical details. I'm just going to introduce my guest today, who is the same as the last time we had this webinar. This webinar is the continuation of what we did when was that? It was almost 3 weeks ago, right? I'm here with my friend Steve Simon from New York. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Hugo, and everybody out there. Nice to see everyone.
So you just returned from Cuba, and I think this was the reason why we had to reschedule our conversation, because coming back from Cuba at the last minute, little things get in the way. So we had to hope our listeners were not too inconvenienced by this. But I think everybody pretty much knows that they can catch up with the replay right after this live stream.
And of course, you can always ask for a refund. I'm not sure what you're paying for this, but maybe you can double their money back, Hugo. What do you think?
Of course. So we have here Geoff from Devon, UK, Tom from Essen, Germany, Richard from North Carolina, Stephen from California, and Severin again from Germany. I remember we had Severin here the last time.
Oh,
so Steve, how was Cuba?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, I don't know if any of the webinar participants out there have been, but as a photographer, it's just amazing. I mean, it's changing. It is changing. There's a lot more construction, a lot more hotels. I think the people still, though, are very kind of open to you as a photographer. We went on a workshop, and it's still one of my favorite places in the world to take my camera onto the streets and start shooting. If you go into the areas that there's a lot of tourism, you're starting to get asked for money. And, I don't really blame people. We can talk about that. I know we touched on it a little last time, but it's still just an incredible place, warm place, and the lights and the environment for us as photographers is amazing.
Oh, you look frozen. I hope you will be able to. No, you're back then.
Okay, thank you.
So you were there on a workshop, and this will just give me the would be a segue into my question that I wanted to ask you
Sure.
about workshops. And the question is, where did I got my notes here? Let me find them. Okay. What are some of the most valuable things you've learned from running your workshops? I know that the people who come on a workshop with you, they learn a lot. But what do you personally learn from running workshops?
Well, I think that, both of us know this, that, as an artist, as a photographer who continually wants to grow, one way is to, take a workshop and learn from others. But if, we're fortunate to be in that position where we could offer these workshops. And the dirty little secret is, it's a two-way street. Of course, I'm willing to share everything with everybody, but so are they. And I'm learning a lot. And I think one of the biggest teaching points for me on the workshops is the critique session, where we share each other's work, because we're all going to sort of the same place. I mean, of course, I encourage people to go out on their own, because I think really to do your best work, you kind of have to be in the moment and be on your own and then meet back. But what's interesting often is, and I think maybe the participants out there have experienced this, to see the different viewpoints of everybody, who goes to a similar environment or place, but comes away with a completely different take. And I think that, the idea of stealing like an artist, when I see work that I think, wow, that's a great idea, or why didn't I think of that? I make notes, and, I'll try and steal it or somehow incorporate it into my own vision and grow with that. So the beauty of being a teacher in these situations is I'm learning from everybody else. I'm seeing what people do, and I'm using it. I'm using it in my own work. It helps me grow as a photographer.
I think this helps everyone, that even all the other participants, that they compare each other photos, maybe how they look at the scene with a different eye, using a different angle or focal length or perspective.
Yeah. And, the other thing, Hugo, that I really try and encourage is, it's not a competition amongst the participants. It's not even necessarily a place to make your best photos. It's really a place to kind of take chances and try new things, because through, by doing that, that's how you're going to kind of move forward in your work. Wherever you are in your work, the people that are out there, you've reached a certain point where, you can comfortably go out and get somewhat predictable and satisfying results. But unless you move forward and try something different, you're going to have those same results. So I think the workshop's a great intensive place to, take chances, try things, see what works, what doesn't, be inspired by others, do what they're doing, even see how it works for you. And in my own experience, a lot of what I learn and what participants learn only starts to reveal itself, months later, because you're in such an intensive situation. I think for a lot of us, we're not really shooting that intensively in any other situation kind of in our regular life, but on a workshop, we've dedicated our time. So that's all we're doing. And that's what's so beautiful about it too.
Yeah. Let's talk about street photography in specifically, because this is what the people who have joined us today want to hear about. I guess that's on the title of the webinar, so that's legitimate to want to know about street photography. And we didn't have enough time in the previous webinar to cover all of the topics that we had thought of covering. I've got this question that I wanted to ask you. And so I'm going to start with this one. On your in your book and in other places, you talk about the rhythm of a place. Can you explain what is the rhythm of a place to you, and how you do discover it? How do you show it?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of attached to some processes that I find makes my shooting more successful, and that is, when you go to a place and it's new to you, you're attracted to something that you see, or an area, or things that are going on. And, if it's a busy market, for example, or a very quiet early morning place, I mean, the rhythm of what's in front of you can be very different. But regardless of where you are, when you find something that's got what you feel, and it's just a feeling, and this isn't science, this is art, and this is intuition. So when you're somehow attracted to a place to photograph, in my own experience, I get much better results when I spend more time in fewer places. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but generally speaking, that's how it is. So when I go to a place, I kind of, see what it is that attracts me. And, before I start shooting, I really try and kind of observe what's going on and go to the areas that I think have the most visual potential. And after a little bit of time, I sort of calm down and I begin to see a different reality of, on first glance, it looks like something else. But after you spend, and when I say time, I'm saying, 30 seconds or a minute. I'm not saying you have to spend a whole day, but just spending a little time, you start to see things a little bit clearer. And the surroundings, because you're a street photographer, chances are using a wide lens starts to kind of recognize that you're there and starts to calm down about that. And, in my experience, by spending more time, I get a sense of what's going on, the rhythm, if you will. And it allows me to kind of take a breath and go to work and start to shoot and go a little bit deeper than maybe the surface of just, whoa, look at this, click, move on. That, and I'm an impatient person, Hugo. I don't like to wait, but I know that in street photography, by adopting this idea, I am more successful. And I'm quite confident that anyone out there that slows down a little bit and spends more time in fewer places are going to see better results.
Yeah, definitely. Can you also mean the rhythm of a place quite literally, as in you're from New York, so it can be a very busy place, and especially if you go, I don't know, Wall Street or
Yes. Yes.
that's the rhythm there is very frenetic. People are just running around, minding their own business, going from office to office, quickly grabbing a lunch or something. Whereas maybe if you go to a place like Central Park,
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, people would be more relaxed unless they're running. But that's different.
Exactly. That's exactly true. And that really describes the rhythm. So I think in some ways it's easier to go to a place where, as Cartier-Bresson says, the pulse beats a little faster because, there's a lot going on. There are a lot of moving parts. And frankly, they're a little less concerned with you. So if you just stop and observe, the pictures come to you, especially when you go to the right place. You see here, okay, I'm going to move over there. And often it's the light that dictates kind of where I'm going to start. So that being said, it's not a science again. There are some places like Times Square, for example, using the New York analogy, where it's even more frenetic than Wall Street. And it almost feels like it should be easier to get stronger images. But when things are that frenetic, it's maybe a little bit difficult to kind of know how best to handle that situation. So in those situations, I really have to kind of deconstruct and take maybe a little slice of this craziness and maybe spend some time there and try and document that before I move on, because it can be overwhelming when it's just too fast moving to a certain degree. So I think every place has its pulse. There's a bit of a sweet spot in terms of busy yet not too busy, so that you can really, pick out and isolate certain situations that are going to make good street photographs. And then of course there's the approach that you're going to take. But this is what I love about the street. It's arguably the easiest access, but also the most difficult thing to do, because again, things are out of your control. But what's in your control is what you find interesting selfishly. And I think that's something that viewers need to sort of realize, is that when you sort of go deep inside and sort of figure out what it is that you want to say about a place, just personally, that's going to help set your work apart from everybody else.
Mm-hmm. You probably know, I live in a small city, relatively small, one of those provincial towns just outside of Milan. And when I go out in my city, my town, everything seems very slow to me. Everything, in part because it's familiar, in part because in being a provincial small town, there's not a lot that happens here. Every time I go to the big city, I go to Milan, everything is much more frenetic and fast, and there's a lot of people around, and most of them are strangers to me. I feel myself energized and wanting to shoot more. I just get that the energy of the big city, the electricity in me. I don't know if it's you live in a big city, so for you maybe it's different.
Yeah, no, I think, your point's well taken. We hear it all the time, that, in the place that's familiar to you, it's kind of hard to be necessarily in the moment and recognizing the visual potential, because, if I go to your town and you go to my town, we're both going to be inspired because things are new to us. That being said, nobody knows the place that you inhabit most often like you do. So if you start to ask yourself some questions, how do I feel about this place? What do I love about it? What do I hate about it? How can I express this through my photography? And if you sort of take that idea on in the place that you're at that may not inspire you, you might be inspired, because nobody knows it the way you do, because you're there all the time. You know the rhythm, as you mentioned. You understand it in a way that a stranger won't. So you can peel the onion a little bit and describe visually things about the place that you inhabit that other people are not necessarily going to know or see. But if you're successful as a photographer, that will be communicated and your work will be stronger because of it. So, if we're stuck in a place, be it New York City or a small town, that's an opportunity, because we know that place. We can express how we feel about that place in a way that is deeper than if you're visiting it for the first time. So I think we have to kind of look for advantages that we have. And you know what? If you start to do a project in the place that might bore you a little bit at the beginning, there's going to be a tipping point when you realize, hey, these are pretty good. And that's just going to gather momentum. And who knows, you might have a project, because the other beauty of photography is a universal language. We all understand it. And if I see your set of pictures from your small town, whoa, I'm going to see it in a way that it's not just a literal depiction, but there's something deeper that's being communicated.
You mentioned wide-angle lenses as a typical instrument of a street photographer. And of course, in order to show the rhythm of a place, it makes sense to show the place itself. So show some context.
Yeah. I mean, right. Go ahead. Do you want me to comment, or do you?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that is it always necessary to do so? Or do you think even shots like small details of something that is on the street, like, I don't know, a door or a piece of urban furniture, can qualify as street photos?
Absolutely. I agree completely. As a matter of fact, I think that, and we've probably spoken this before, but pictures that don't tell the whole story, I think, bring you in and make you want to see more. And I'm often, I think when we're, with other photographers, helping them improve, the idea of creating a set of pictures so that, the one picture will hopefully tell a story or provoke an emotion. But the idea of isolating certain things that you're kind of seeing without telling the whole story, I think, can be intriguing to the viewer, who sees it and kind of wants to know what, why, where, why. And then as the narrative starts to unfold in a set of images from that place, the images become stronger, more meaningful to you and to the viewer. So I'm always encouraging people to think in terms of a set of pictures. And the idea of a set, it could be, portfolio is the big umbrella, which is your general best stuff. But then if you can focus in on a place and, show a variety of different images where no one image tells the whole story, the sum can be much greater than the parts, and you can see a lot more, and each individual picture can be more interesting, especially when linked together with others. So, I mean, there's no limit to where you can take this stuff.
Great. Sorry. I wanted to ask, when you think about a place and you think about what we call the rhythm of a place and you want to show it, and you go out and you say, I want to capture this kind of atmosphere and so on. Do you typically go out with a plan in mind, or you just go out open to be inspired by whatever happens in front of you?
No, that's a good question. And again, there are no rules, when we pursue these creative things. Sometimes serendipity can be your guide. You don't want to think, you just want to sort of wander and see. But in my own experience, other times by giving myself some sort of an assignment or some sort of pinpoint to kind of guide me, it keeps my vision kind of in line to the point where, I start here, I go a little deeper and deeper and deeper. So, for example, sometimes it's a key word. You go to a place like Tokyo where frenetic is definitely a description that describes it. So maybe that's my guide. I want to aim my camera and create images that describe frenetic. So, if I'm in a quiet place or a place that's just kind of in between, not quite good enough, I'll maybe keep moving on until, whoa, this is frenetic. Okay, well, so now I'm gonna do that. So, you can use any kind of keywords, solitude, loneliness, and these can be guides that sort of give you some direction when you need it. Other times you don't. You just want to be out there and just, react to what you're curious about. And sometimes, it even could be a color. I know, on the workshop, I'll often have a list of different assignments I can offer people. And, sometimes, the color red or the color orange. And when you are looking for something, you're going to find it. When you don't know what you're looking for, you may not, or you might discover something even better.
Let me just say hi to a few people here on the chat. Gilly, we have met in France. Hi, Gilly, and Mark from Toronto, Canada. Jose Manuel from Porto, and Peggy from BC, which I suppose stands for British Columbia.
Yes, I'm Canadian. You remember that. I mean, I can't see the list of people that are here, but I'm sure there's some people that I know that as well. So shout out to everybody there.
Okay. You talked about color, and this gives me the opportunity to ask you this question. And I'm referring to the title of a book by another photographer, another New Yorker, by the way, Jay Maisel. I'm sure you know him very well.
Yes.
And he has this book, and the title of the book is Light, Gesture, Color. So I would like to ask you, what of those three elements in a photo is more important to you? Or it's always, or if there are other elements that you look for in a photo?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Yeah, Jay Maisel, what an inspirational guy. I mean, I think he's got to be in his mid to late 80s now. And last I heard, still shooting, always has his Nikon around his neck. And, that'll be you, that'll be me, that'll be everyone that's passionate about photography. Yeah, that's the title of his book, Light, Gesture, Color. And I think, he's talking about those three key elements coming together to create a 5-star portfolio image. And I think that, for my own self, I mean, I think that, often one of the three, light, gesture, color, and I like black and white too, but we'll talk about color for now. One of those three is going to sort of carry the weight of the success of the image. Sometimes it's about the light, sometimes it could be just about the color. The gesture is so important. And by gesture, I consider that moment, capturing the moment. So as a street photographer, I mean, all these things come together. And when you hit a grand slam, to use a baseball analogy for those that know, or, when lightning strikes and everything comes together, or when the planets align, not very often, but hopefully, once a year we get that image where, oh my God, we feel it's lucky, but at the same time, every day we go out and that's what we're after. And usually we don't quite sort of make it that far to get. Usually it's one of the three or two of the three, but to get it all, that's not easy to do. So light can carry the image. If you have great lights and the image is beautiful, then that's fine. But maybe, the content is not all that compelling or the moment's a little off. If the gesture or moment that's captured and the light is beautiful, chances are, wow, that's going to really be something to look for. And color, that's why I've often said, I probably said it last webinar, that good color in your image magnifies the content. And for street shooting, light is maybe less important, as I've mentioned, than in landscape work, for example, where it's maybe all important. You can use the harsh light of the street to your advantage sometimes. And particularly if you take the color off and you convert it to black and white, that can be very powerful. But which is why on the street, I love to shoot in soft light, be it overcast and or sort of more golden light, because again, the distraction of color that often hurts an image is subdued by the blanket of warm tones that, you know, envelops the scene during the golden light hours. So I think for color especially, light's more important. But see, it's always a combination of the three. And when you get the three together, that's what we're looking for all the time.
So I know it's an old conundrum, but black and white versus color. My question specifically would be, when do you decide to use one or the other? And it is something that you decide before taking a shot, or is something that you sometimes decide after?
Yeah. You know, a very good question. And I think that, you know, I'm old enough to remember the days when you had to commit by putting black and white film or color film in the camera. You're too young, and most of the viewers are, to remember that. But I think it's good to have the mindset of trying to photograph in black and white or color. Cuba is a great example, because Cuba, I think anyone that's been there or anyone that's seen the images, chances are they're color images. But the reality is that, you know, sometimes the black and white, although a little less personal, a little less realistic, you know, might be a better choice often in Cuba to describe sort of the harshness of the environment, not the people, but the environment that they live in and the life that they lead, because, you know, it's not a rich country and it's not an easy existence there. I think that if you have the confidence to commit to it, that's a good idea. If we're shooting digital, we're shooting color raw. So, you know, that confidence is only, you know, we can go back to the color for sure. More and more, I'm looking at things in black and white. But one of the things that comes up a lot in critique is that when your color is sort of distracting, you know, if you look at an image, you know, having magnetic weight, and the viewer is compelled to look at certain areas, they tend to look at the areas that are most in focus, the areas that are the lightest, because that draws the eye. But also certain colors have weight. And sometimes that color is drawing you into the image to a place that's maybe not where you need to be, or where, as a photographer, you want them to go. So by converting to black and white, then suddenly that color weight is moot, and you can see the image a little more clearly. So I think these are the questions that come up in critique that are most important and most valuable in terms of learning kind of how to do it. But sometimes converting it all to black and white is a brave thing to do. Other times, you know, it's okay to mix them up even. But for me, you know, sometimes, you know, if you can't get the color weight, make it black and white. That's a technical reason to do it, but that's not a good reason to do it. I think you have to sort of understand, you know, the benefits of both. Black and white cuts to the content. You know, you see what's there. It's somewhat timeless. It's a little less realistic because we don't see the world that way. And as I've often said too, it's interesting to me that some of the strongest color photographs are the most monochromatic, in that they don't have a lot of color. They're sort of one color with a little touch of, and it's not selective color, but it's something else.
I think this is a perfect example. I'm just
Yeah.
while you were talking, I was sharing some of your photos. I'm trying to pick some from Cuba. All right, and this looks like it's Havana, probably.
Yes.
With kind of muted colors, and then the dash of orange light from the lamp on the street. Right?
Yes, very monochromatic. And I think for me, that's often, you know, a sign of a strong image, and not just my own, but others that I see, where the color, I mean, sometimes the color, you know, if you're looking at Martin Parr with his flash and the color is bright, if the color sort of suits the subject too, I mean, that's also important.
Okay, let me just get a question here. We got some questions from our audience via emails and so on.
Yeah.
And since you talked about converting color to black and white and so on, let's talk a little bit about post-processing.
Sure.
A bit of a loaded questions if you want. How much in the way of post-processing do you allow yourself to do?
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I'm not much of a processor in that. To me, it's about, you know, try and capture as much as I can, you know, within the file itself. So I have a sort of best practice idea. I try and simplify my process on the street and capture, the most data as I can, to the point where even, and this is something new for me, my colleague in Japan, Suichi Hayashi, talked about the artist's intent, whereas I would, just from a technical standpoint, try and capture as much information as I could within the histogram. And he told me that, sometimes if I want the dark mood of an image, I will purposely underexpose it to the point where, right out of the box, it's underexposed and the mood is there. And I've sort of come to realize that having all the information is not always a benefit. Sometimes if that image is going to be dark right from the beginning when you capture it, it's okay to kind of make it a little underexposed. We have that pillow of latitude with a raw file, a couple of stops. So that being said, really, I try and minimize my post-processing. I come from a journalistic background where I don't mess with the pixels. I will mess with the brightness and so on. At the same time, when I have what I consider to be a 5-star image or a strong image that I want to share with the world, I know that by enhancing it, and as opposed to post-process, I like that word enhance, I could make that picture, 100% stronger. So, the image is there. Can I make it better in post-processing? And I think that for listeners out there, if their post-processing skills are not quite up to their capture skills, in that they get a great image, but they can't really process it in a way that makes it even better, get some help. Have a professional process that 5-star image and see what it looks like. And that's the bar. And then just keep learning until you get to the point where you're very happy with being able to kind of make the image stronger. So yeah, it's I'd rather be out there shooting than in front of the computer. Although I admit I love all aspects of photography, from the technical to the creative to the post-processing to a certain degree. But as a professional, as you know, we're not shooting enough. Just before we went on air, we were sort of lamenting the fact that we, wish we were shooting a little bit more. But because we need money to survive, and because we're using photography as a means to make money, we don't have the advantage of a lot of the people listening in the webinar who may have a full-time job, but when they're shooting, they're just shooting for the love of it, for the joy of it, for the passion of it, so they can, do what they want. And I think, that's another kind of advantage.
Great. And just jumping from topic to topic here, trying to get in as many questions we got as possible. So next question is, what's the best place to post pictures online for an honest critique?
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'm not as aware of. I don't really know. I don't think it's Instagram. I mean, it's nice to get a thumbs up or a like, but I think the idea of cultivating an audience, and it's not a question of numbers. It's a question of sort of quality of followers, not quantity. So if you have followers that follow you legitimately because they like you, they like your work, you can put out some real pointed questions and sort of see what kind of response you're going to get, and use that. Just take it, try and be objective, listen to what people say and go, I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. I think that for me, with workshop participants, one of the difficult things I see people grappling with is confidence. They're not quite sure which picture or if or what. And, that's a delicate time in your development as a photographer. It's a time where, you have to make it through. And in my experience, there is a tipping point as you go through this, as you push yourself to grow and get better, where that confidence starts to, you can feel it a little. You're a little more secure in your ideas. So, maybe you can pipe in on this. I don't know specifically of a place. I know that workshops are a great place, because not only will you hear, push the idea of the workshops, but not only will you hear from me or you or the leader, but you're also going to hear from the other participants. And that conversation is usually really powerful. And in my experience, it's just a little nugget that you get here and there that elevates you moving forward. And then you just keep going until you get elevated again by something that you've learned. And it's a bit of a magical process, like photography itself. Suddenly you know where you're at and you want to get better. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I still want to grow and get better. Maybe it's a little harder for me in the sense that I do know a lot from all the experience that I've had, but I'm still seeking ideas and ways that I can move forward in my own work. I still am inspired by things that I see that, whoa, that's really original or a new way of looking at it. How can I steal from that and somehow incorporate it in my own?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had an answer to that. All I know is that social media is probably not the place to get an honest critique. As to where to get it, probably, I mean, yeah, social media can still work if you manage to find a small, tightly knit group of people that have a common shared interest, and especially they have your best interest in mind, in their heart. Otherwise, it's random strangers, hardly ever helpful in that respect.
That's just to, again, sort of, shameless plug, but the Passionate Photographer, the new version will be out next year, probably around the time of our workshop in Milan.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, in the last chapter, I kind of interviewed and plagiarized my friend Steve Attard, who's kind of a social media expert. And, he feels that Instagram is, there's never been anything like it in the history of photography, and it's a great place. And, through his knowledge, I've, after interviewing him, I put forward an idea of how to, get 1,000 followers in 3 months. And it's building an audience that is specific to you, that you can start to, use social media as a way of cultivating information and learning and growing. And, you're not in it for the number of likes or for commercial purposes. You're in it to learn, and you can build the audience like that. Those kinds of followers that can help you, and together you can sort of move forward and grow. And, eventually you'll kind of outgrow that and need new ways to kind of find new information to move forward and get better.
Good. Let me see my notes here just a second. You talked about passion being an amateur versus being a professional. Many people would love to be a professional, but they run the risk of killing their passion, right? As a professional, and a full-time professional, specifically with a family, you have a young kid. I know it's sometimes hard to balance all those things, right? You need to take photos, you need to process them, even though it doesn't take a lot of time in your case, as you said. You need to show them. You need to grow your social media audience if you want, or kind of for your tribe, because you rely on them for your income, your putting bread on the table, livelihood. Right, that was the word I was looking for.
Hey, listen, I mean, if I spoke Italian as good as you speak English, that would be incredible. That's never going to happen.
Thanks. So a few words on how can people balance, especially if they want to move to a more of a professional, being more professional in terms of photography.
Yeah, I kind of wish I had all the answers there. That's the biggest challenge I have, is to find the time, because, as we talked earlier, shooting is just a small part of it, yet it's likely the most important part. There's different photography. I've been a professional for a long time, and, you morph, and the industry has changed to the point where all these incredible photographers, commercial photographers, etc., stop making the kind of living that they used to. And there's all these great photographers who are maybe a little bit older, who are not as social media savvy, and, they're hurting a little bit. So, there's the idea of getting assignments to take pictures and make money from that. And that could be a wonderful thing. But the reality is, in my own experience, that often the assignments that you get that make money are not necessarily completely aligned with the passion and the art that you're kind of wanting to do. And, that's the dream, doing your thing and getting paid to do it. But even amongst those that today still are kind of successful at that, chances are, they're having to do other things. And that could sort of take you away from your art form and ultimately hurt you a little bit as a photographer. So I think that you have to kind of pick and choose, what it is that you most feel is most important, and what you most enjoy. And because your time's going to be limited, put your eggs in that basket, so to speak. So, I guess if you're asking me to sort of morph into the business world, I mean, start with the dream scenario and then work your way down. So whatever the dream is, move toward that. And if there's a way that, that dream scenario will suddenly pay the bills, well, that's a fantastic thing. It will happen. It could happen. It will happen, but it may be not on your timeline because it's going to take some time to make happen, and often people kind of drop out before they quite make it. So it's not even a question of talent, it's a question of perseverance, if you will. Persistence and perseverance, there's nothing you can't do. And the other thing too is, as I've gotten a little bit older, although I've had some work done, I'm looking young, but I think that you have to kind of work a little bit smarter, and you realize kind of what's important, and you want to sort of continue to move forward and call yourself a photographer and not something else. You want to always be making pictures, and I think one way is to kind of find those personal projects that you're passionate about.
I'm just going to add something to this, but before, I would like to invite our viewers to give us some feedback in the chat there. Just send questions or what you think about what we are just talking about. We'll really appreciate your feedback here, your comments.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I wanted to say, I'm a big fan of Seth Godin. I don't know if you heard about the guy.
Yeah.
He has lots of things to say, not about photography, but about marketing, about business and commerce and topics like that. And he has this concept of the minimum viable audience, which is the minimum number of people that would give you a livelihood with what you do and that align with what you do. So with your passion. And you need to find those people. That will help you not get down to compromises. So you don't need to. There's another quote that I like, and it's from David Bowie. And in an interview, he said, "Never play to the gallery." Right?
Mm.
Find your. I would not say your style. Find what your voice. Find what you want to express, and then find the people that align with that message. Don't try to be a jack of all trades and try to please everyone. You will never be able to please everyone. You only need to please your minimum viable audience.
Yeah, I love that. I think I agree wholeheartedly. I quote Bowie a lot in my workshop sometimes, because he says a lot of things as an artist that I think that are very helpful to anyone pursuing, be it music or photography or whatever it is that's creative in their own lives. And that's to kind of, move past the comfort zone into uncharted waters. And I don't remember the whole quote, it's a long quote, but when you don't feel your feet are quite touching the ground or the surface of the floor of the ocean, you're in that right place to make strong work, because you don't know what's going to happen, but you're taking a chance. And that's what's important.
Exactly. That was the same interview when he started with "never play to the gallery," and then he goes on with this metaphor of treading into the water, and then just don't stop where your feet touch the water. Go to the point where you start
get nervous.
Stop feeling the bottom of the sea and getting nervous, and this is where you create your best work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hunter S. Thompson, who's a writer I really love, said something similar in that, you could, do you want to, as an artist, stay sort of safely entrenched, on the shore of the water, or do you kind of wade into the water and let it sort of take you where it's going to be? It takes more courage to go into the water than to stand on the shore. And I think it's another great metaphor for us, everyone out there as photographers, to grow, to try something new and get nervous and get out of our sort of comfort level.
Okay, very good. We went a bit on a tangent, but I think this is a very cool conversation. I love talking about those topics. But we got people who ask more specific, more technical questions, so I'm going to send them to you. And we're just going a bit more into the technique here. We got a question from Brian, who asks, do you cap your ISO to avoid noise?
Yeah, I think that generally I know my tool, my camera. I'm a Nikon guy, or Nikon is the proper way to pronounce it. I have a Nikon FM2 here on my T-shirt that my mom got me. And I think that for me, I don't want noise to get in the way. I think noise is a little less um, acceptable in color than it is black and white. So depending on the tool that I'm using, I mean, if I use my D5, which is really kind of the low light king, I could easily shoot at 8,000 ISO and feel confident about it. Whereas with my D850 or with my Z mirrorless, I like to be 3,200 tops, 2,500 sometimes I'll set it to, especially with the mirrorless camera that's got the stabilization that's amazing. I can still shoot at slower shutter speeds and get a sharp image, as long as the subject's not moving. So yeah, I tend to kind of I'll use auto ISO, and I'll set a ceiling of whatever I think is the acceptable limit in my mind. And for me, with those tools, it's that. For others, it might be higher. I think you can go to higher ISOs if you convert it to black and white, because the noise, in quotation marks, is maybe a little more acceptable. It kind of reminds me of the grain that the old films used to produce. So yeah, I have my limits, because ultimately I want people to look at the image and just see the image, see the content, react to it. I don't want them to see anything technical. I don't want them to see noise. I don't want them to see, oh, that's a wide angle lens. I want them to feel and see what it is I want to sort of share with them.
Yeah, I believe people are sometimes too worried about noise.
Mm.
If a picture is so boring that all you can see is the noise, then it's a boring picture. I think it's Rick Sammon said that. He used to say that. But at the same time, I do set a ceiling from my auto ISO. My camera, I think, current camera can shoot at 51,200 ISO. I never use that. It's too noisy for me.
I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said I'd probably cap it at 6,400 or something.
Yeah, the Nikon D5 in high mode, I think it's up to like 3 million ISO or something. It's just ridiculous. So I've said, and this wasn't my joke, but he said it was really the first camera that lets you take a decent shot of the inside of your lens cap. So let's pause for the uproarious laughter out on the web. All right, let's continue then.
Yeah.
I mean, the cameras we have now are incredible. The low light capability is just amazing. So, we are in this golden age, and especially on the street, I love going out at night. I mean, at night, it's a magic that you're going to capture without a tripod in a way that really allows you to capture the mood and the atmosphere of the place, be it Havana or Milan or New York or wherever. So I love going out, and now, color is not an issue now with white balance and raw. It's easy to get what you need. So yeah, it's something that, add night into the equation, and there's a certain kind of unpredictable magic that you can get. So I love shooting in low light and at night.
Yeah, me too. And I prefer a noisy, grainy picture to a picture that is blurry, because I was using too low a shutter speed. So I got camera shake or subject movement. So this annoys me more than noise. So
yeah, I agree.
Would be to go as high as you can go with your ISO before it starts hurting your eyes. But prefer high ISO and noise to camera shake, for example.
I've said it before that I think the number one reason why a picture ends up tossed in the trash instead of hung on the wall is that the shutter speed was too slow, and as a consequence, you get this kind of movement that, if it's not helping the picture like it sometimes does, giving that illusion of movement, it's likely hurting it. So I'd much rather have a noisy, compelling image than a blurry, great dynamic range that gets tossed in the trash like you.
Right. We think the same here. Another technical question. We talked about ISO. Let's talk about megapixels. We got a question from Bill, who asks, how much do you use the high megapixel cameras to allow you to shoot wide and still get a usable cropped image? Or do you crop with your feet only?
Well, no, I don't crop with my feet only. One of the things that I tell people on the street, and this is my idea of it, and there are many ways to do things, and I would never say, do it my way. But in reality, the strongest images, technically there's a certain level that they're at. And for me, focus is important. The right part of the frame needs to be in focus. And even now with mirrorless cameras and autofocus covering a great range, they may not cover everything. I would rather keep it loose, move that focus point, focus on what I need to be sharp, get it sharp, and then in post, I will maintain the same aspect ratio, move that box around, and essentially I'm composing in post all the time to maximize what it is I'm trying to say with that particular scene. You can always crop in, you can't really crop out. So for me, having more megapixels is a blessing for a street photographer, because I can't always zoom with my feet. Sometimes I need to stay back a little bit. Sometimes I don't quite make it to where I want to be, but I capture it anyway. And then in post, I'm able to kind of, whoa, I got the image. So having more megapixels allows me to do this. And it's a way on the street where, that first capture is not necessarily what I'm going to show people. I'm going to enhance it when I can, and I'm going to crop it to maximize its communication. Focus is less important if you're zone focusing, for example, using a more depth of field and not having, that's the fastest way to shoot. And it can be a very powerful way to shoot. And I'm experimenting with it a little bit more. I haven't done it in years, but now that I have a mirrorless, it lends itself for zone focusing. The downside of having too much depth of field is that with some shots, because everything's sharp, if I, again, look at the image as being magnetized, if you have too much in focus, the viewer's eye might be attracted to areas that are sharper, that are less important, that would have been better to be, f2.8 rather than f8, and the picture would have been stronger. So every situation is different.
I personally, I do crop. I typically will crop if I want to remove a distraction. Sometimes if I want to maybe arrange the composition a little bit, move a subject a bit more off center or even a bit more towards the center. I like to crop when I'm shooting vertically, because for whatever reason, I don't like the 3:2 aspect ratio of typical DSLR or APS-C cameras. It's too narrow, too tall. Right? So I like 4x5. So I would typically crop a vertical picture 4x5, just because the frame itself is more pleasing to my eyes. What I do, or what I try to do, I don't always succeed. I try not to, and to answer Bill's question, I try not to rely too much on the idea that I have a lot of megapixels and I can always crop in post, right? I try to get it right in camera, if that works.
Yeah.
Sometimes, as you said, you cannot always zoom with your feet. You cannot maybe cross a street if there's traffic. You need to stand back, and then to crop later.
I think that in my workshops, I'm kind of known as a bit of a cropper, in that if I can make a picture 6% better with a different crop, and again, I like to keep the aspect ratio consistent frame to frame, so there's a consistency within the pictures. But if I can make a picture stronger with a crop, even if it's a slight crop, I do it. And, again, with the idea of, you look at an image, you go to certain areas of the image as a viewer. The one thing I didn't mention was that, of course, it's the light and dark tones that have visual weight that will bring you to the light areas, to the focused areas, but also the composition. So, it's not just a question of thirds. I mean, that's a good starting point as a guide, but it's not always the case. So I'm going to sort of finesse that box, move it around. If I can make the picture 10% better through a crop, I will. And I'm often micro cropping, if you will, to bring out, whatever it is to make that image stronger. And I think that, you're not going to spend time on all your images, but when you've decided, hey, this is a picture that's worth investing some time in, it also is really important, I think, to see if it can be improved with a crop. And sometimes when you make the crop area, you can see what's being cropped out. And as long as you're not cropping out things that are adding an extra new layer of information being communicated, if it's just more sky or more of the same, that's one thing. But if there's a key element, I might think twice about cropping it. I might leave it in, even though it's maybe not perfectly balanced, but that little element cropped out makes it a less interesting photo. it's complicated, and it's a case-by-case scenario for me.
Mm-hmm.
But having all those megapixels to me is a blessing. Bring them on. The more, the better. I know it bogs down the computer and so on. It's not a question of being able to make giant prints, which would be nice, I suppose. But it's a question of finding a picture within a picture and still making it usable. In the Nikon world, I was very used to 12 megapixels before the 36 megapixel camera came out, the D800. So, like you, I want to try and get it as much in the camera, but leave it a little loose. I mean, that's fine. I can always crop in. As mentioned, you can't crop out.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your favorite composition tools. What you look for. I mean, we mentioned the rule of thirds. We know it's a guideline, it's not a rule, and so on. But I think that the problem with the rule of thirds it's kind of shallow, and people sometimes stop there. What are your favorite compositional tools?
Well, I think that there comes a point where composition is really just an unconscious situation, an unconscious thing. You're letting the subject matter kind of dictate to you, what you're going to include. I think for a lot of people who are maybe newer to photography, of course, you can't see everything within the frame. The wider the lens, the more of a story you're going to tell, the more you're going to be able to include. And that could be a plus when it works, but it's often a minus in that you've included stuff that takes away from the main area of what you're trying to kind of show. You're so concentrated on, the person or the thing that you don't really see all the other stuff that's contributing to the image and maybe distracting from what it is you're saying. So I think it's a question of finding the thing, finding your framing, if you will, as opposed to composition. Shoot and then move, and shoot and move in close, move far away, working the photo. I mean, I described this as part of the process, but when you do that, it gives you options, and you realize that, you know what, I was attracted to the wide scene, but why does the close one work best? And the more you do that, the more you learn from that process. And I think, when I talk about like portraits, for example, I will, if I'm meeting someone on the street, I'm compelled to want to take their picture, I will kind of, move them into the light, maybe if they're looking at me. If it's that kind of a portrait, it's not a candid moment. And, before I actually start shooting and talking to them and trying to pull out and hope that something spontaneous will happen to make that street portrait stronger, I am, without looking at them, I've sort of put their head in the frame, and I'll sort of frame the background to make sure there's nothing distracting. Sometimes selective focus by using a wide aperture helps to make that happen. And once I've got that composition, then I'll start to engage and try and pull out some, spontaneous thing from them, expression or whatever, to make it strong. So I don't think it's so much of, put the person here, put the person there. I have many images that go against all the rules that, are, right dead center. It works. I've been doing this a long time, so I kind of have a sense for it. But I think for all of us, having that guide thing, but giving yourself options, moving, clicking, if there's time, move, click, work it as much as you can, because you're going to learn from that process.
Yes, I mean, I second the idea of trying different compositions, trying different angles. It's not always something that you get the first time right. You need to work the scene. And then the subject, as you say, will dictate sometimes its own composition. You will see with your eye. It's to me at least, it's very instinctive.
Yes.
I don't think in terms of rule of thirds or spirals or
No.
leading lines. Sometimes they're very apparent, but yeah, I mean, it's very instinctive to me as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. That we have. I know you are busy with family and work and everything, but I hope people got a lot of from this webinar. I know I did. I know personally, this was great. Learn a few more things. We talk quite frequently, not as much as we would like, but I still got a great hints and inputs for food for thought from you today.
Yeah.
before we close this, I would just like to tell everyone that if you want to go more in depth, we already mentioned this. We are going to have this workshop that we are going to lead together in my home turf in Milan next year. It's going to be in April 20 to 25 in Milan. It's going to be you and me roaming the streets of, as I said, Milan is a very exciting city. It's full of life, especially in recent years. It's been booming. It's the city, it's the capital of fashion of Italy, and it's also one of the best places to have great food in Italy, which is one of the best places to have great food all over the world. I hope you agree with that.
Yes, yes. I'm looking forward to all aspects of that. But I was only in Milan once before, relatively short time. So I wish I had longer, and now we will. So it's going to be pretty exciting.
Let me see. I'll just share a little bit of our page that we have here. There's a link to this if you're interested on the same page that you are watching this. There's a link at the bottom, also a banner. You can go there to learn more about our workshop, but you can also go to my website at tours.ucphoto.me, and you can find it under the tours menu there. There's some little photos here to whet your appetite, literally and figuratively, with some food shots and things that we'll be able to do together, black and white, color, and a little bit about our philosophy and so on and so forth. So check it out. We would love to have you here with us. Let me stop sharing the screen. Love to have you.
Want to tell people, when they click, if they're going to sign up, it's going to lead you to another website, photoeducate.com. That's a website that I run. So it's not like you shouldn't be nervous about it. That's how you sign up on that other website. So, a couple of people have mentioned that, when they go from my blog, for example, thepassionatephotographer.com, and they go to the workshops, because it's Photo Educate, it feels like it's maybe something different. Maybe that's something I need to work on, because I think people are generally a little bit wary of the internet, and especially, it's a big commitment, both in time and money. So just to put people at ease, the process, takes you away from Hugo's site to the photoeducate.com site.
Yeah, or you can also go directly to photoeducated.com, and in the catalog of courses of workshops, you can find Milan Street Photography, Passionate Street Photography Workshop.
Yes.
Well, we look forward to having some of you there, if you can, in Milan next year, April 20 to 25. But otherwise, keep following us. Keep following me at ucphoto.me. And you, Steve, is that passionatephotographer.com?
Yeah, passionatephotographer.com is the blog. And for January, I've got some big plans to kind of finally, get consistent with it and make it kind of a thing that people are going to want to go back to time and again. And if anyone is interested, we have a couple of spots open this weekend. Nikon D850. I'm doing a course just on that camera. Can you imagine? You go 2 days, 16 hours just on that camera, and we're not even going to cover it all.
So I need to get that camera.
You need to get that camera. It is a great camera. It's a masterpiece.
I know. I used to shoot Nikon, so I know they're great cameras. All right. So thanks again for listening, for watching us. For the people who were not able to watch us, and tell your friends, they can go to the same page where you are watching the live streaming today. You will be able to catch the replay, not only of this one, but also of the previous webinar we had back in November. Maybe we'll do another one. Who knows? Just keep following us, stay on our mailing list, and we'll be in touch soon. And thanks, Simon. Thanks, Steve. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. No problem. Yeah, I look forward to talking to you again and seeing you. I know it'll come really quickly before we know it. It seems far away, but I know it's life is moving very fast.
Great. Okay. Bye-bye. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everybody.